this year, so it's probably not my dad's age, but my mother's age. She was 21 years younger than he was. But, but those are people that are still, they're in fixed incomes. These are not the folks, no, I would not like to see them move either. But also the fact that this is new housing, and that we can really create and set a kind of standard, that's what I'm hoping that we can do. And that's why it's like, I'm starting this nonprofit and we're calling it a laboratory intentionally because of the type of research and development that we want to do. Like, let's look at really good best practices and bring that kind of stuff in, because we're not trying to do the same stuff except like put a little twist on it. We want to do something radically different. Yeah.
I'm actually in the ESP program, and I wish I were able to participate in the workshop when you were doing it, but I didn't know about the program then. I actually have been working in nutrition education for the last 6 years in California before coming here. And I guess my question is, I really believe in working for people and for the betterment of the community. So can you speak to how you get the community to mobilize? I know that in my own family, it's really hard to get my aunts and uncles that are pre-diabetic to switch to nutritious foods. They're used to the fried foods and they're used to just doing things the way they're doing things. So can you speak to how you mobilized and like what types of tools you used for advocating within the community?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Over the past decade or so. I found very seriously that, look, you want to do the traditional kinds of organizing, the door knocking and really sharing all that kind of stuff. But the thing that I felt was really much more powerful was actually doing projects that people could see and literally, hearing what they would tell you and responding to that. There was a very good reason why I was like, we're going to start working on building a park, down on our waterfront. It was because we'd heard from folks that they were tired of taking their kids, someplace else for a safe place to play. And so it was just like, oh, we can do something in our neighborhood. And then thus the search for trying to figure out where it was. And fortunately, my dog found it. But ultimately, that was a part of a plan. Hearing people, and you really have to like listen to what people are telling you. I've got both a brother and a sister, and I'm like, who's your sister and how are you pre-diabetic? Seriously? But really, growing up the way that we did, it's like, and you make little changes for people, and you do, and it takes some time. Like, cooking classes, at the farmer's market, because it took a while for folks to really, we had a farmer's market in our neighborhood for a couple years before people visited it, really. It was hard, but again, we have some really bad habits to break, and so much of it really is just sticking with people, and it's not gonna happen overnight. It doesn't ever happen overnight, and don't be alarmed because it doesn't. But I can assure you, when you continue to make your changes in your own life and keep showing people, people will see it. But or do that in an organizational level as well. And that's why the projects informing policy stuff was so important, for me, even whether, back in the old days and also now. People need to see things changing, and they can respond to that a whole lot easier because it's a very visceral thing that they can take on, on some level. And I really think that that's the major way to do it. And they don't have to be huge projects. Seriously, like our first incarnation of a bunch of our stuff, they were so lame, but they were different. And they made people go, huh, and that's all we needed. That's how you start. And then their expectations got higher, and it's just like, and now I'm walking down the street, and they're like, ugh, Majora, have you seen, like, they just, they need to do more trash collection at the park. Like, what do I do? Like, seriously? But that's the kind of phone calls I get, because, I'll change everything. But it's kind of a nice problem to have. I'm just kidding. So there you go. Oh, there's a question all the way in the back.
Thank you. I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. I love what you do on the Promised Land.
Oh, thank you.
But it also inspired me, amongst a few others, to start my own podcast in pre-production.
Nice.
It's on women entrepreneurs for now. And so out of my own curiosity, I'm wondering, when you still considered yourself a young woman entrepreneur, when these things were starting, what was the biggest setback you faced, and how did you overcome that in these projects?
The biggest setback, It's actually kind of a two-part question, because, you know, when you're, and I definitely did call myself an entrepreneur. Like, even when I ran a nonprofit, I knew that the work that I did was very entrepreneurial in nature, and I claimed that in a big way, which was a problem, I think, to some folks, because, you know, you're not supposed to do that at the grassroots level. Like, you're just supposed to work tirelessly and kill yourself and not expect any return. But I was like, no. But anywho, but really it was. But what I did have a problem with, because on some level I did have a problem with being kind of like sort of sticking out like a sore thumb, because we did do stuff a lot differently. Like, I was often not considered a community organizer because I had a very particular way of doing community organizing that wasn't necessarily considered traditional. And that was really hurtful, because people would come right out and say, like, you don't do this. And I was like, yes, I do. And then after a while, I think I spent way more time like worrying about what people thought about me, my peers mostly, as opposed to connecting with folks who actually supported the work. And I realized that what I did for a while was like have on blinders and tried to focus on folks who really could not have cared less about me or the work that I was doing. And so the second part of it was that I just had to get out of my own way and realize that I was doing really good work, and that it was important, and that there were people who appreciated it, and that should have been my audience from the get-go. But it took me way too many years to figure that out. But now I know. You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Amanda, and I'm actually from the Bronx. My family's lived there since the 40s. And I'm currently creating a project called the Womanhood Project, and HOOD stands for Helping Ourselves Overcome Discrimination. And it's a program for high school girls in the Bronx to teach social and political activism.
Nice.
And I want to incorporate environmental justice into the curriculum. And so my question to you is, how do we engage particularly young people about these issues?
I'll tell you a quick story. When I first started doing this work, and, you know, I came back home, you know, and these are people that I knew, you know, like older, especially the older residents, because my family had been in the neighborhood for a really long time. And so I remember finding out about the waste facility and being incensed, just like, oh my gosh, the pollution, and oh my God, the discrimination, and blah, blah, blah. And I was just horrified. And I remember sitting down at the kitchen table with my mom and one of her best friends. Her name is Miss Maddie. And I'm like going off about this. I'm like, everybody should be like really upset. And Miss Maddie like looked at me and said, baby, where you been? This is the South Bronx. You know, people aren't going to care about that. And on one level, she was wrong, because there were people who cared. But on a bunch of different levels, she was totally right, because the way I was talking about it was not the way anybody was going to hear me. So what we had to do was really think about, okay, well, what are people really concerned about? And, you know, just from talking to folks, realized that there was like, between the asthma rate and people having to take their kids to the emergency room as often as they did, I mean, it was like clockwork. And then I realized, oh, do people make the connection between what's going on, you know, in the industrial part of the neighborhood and the fact that now the city wants to bring more stuff? And that's when people started to be like, wait, they want to build another one of these things? That's when they started to really focus. You know, I have to say, you know, early on and even now, I don't really use words like green, environment, or sustainable in most of the groups that I talk to. I just don't. You know, I'll talk about the quality of their lives, you know, and what's important to them. You know, I talk mostly about jobs. And so you find out what's important to them, and you work with them that way. That's really what you have to do. It is learning another language, not assuming that you know like what's important to them. And once you have that, then you've got friends for life. You really do, because it just means you've heard them, and yeah, totally. It's really cool, really cool. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm actually from the Bay Area and an environmental ed teacher. And I was really interested in the study you cited from the University of Illinois because, there's been this growing movement to put more gardens into our schools, to have more of that garden, urban ag education. But I really feel that we're not making a lot of headway because, first of all, it's very easy to start a garden, but very difficult to maintain it and
Right.
continue it.
Right.
And also, you can say, yes, trees can do that, but when you're facing so many issues, from poverty to the commercialization of childhood, you really realize that you're up against a lot, and it's really hard to see those effects. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, that's why I started a green jobs training and placement system, so people would be connected to, because you're right. I think on some level, like the goal was to help people see that that they could have a personal and a financial stake, in improving the environment. Because your point is incredibly well taken, that people have other stuff that they're worried about, especially people who are living in some pretty challenged situations. And to Amanda's point over here, that how you express stuff to people, in ways that actually is meaningful for them. Like, it wasn't my idea, literally, to start thinking about poverty alleviation and environmental remediation. It was folks who were telling me, like, well, what about jobs? And I'm just trying to think about, well, given what I know and love and what I know to be true, statistically, like through all sorts of research, how can we bring these things together? And so creating the kind of policies that I think are going to support things like jobs and green infrastructure and real urban agribusiness. I'm not talking community gardens. I'm talking really truly using technology to create the kind of production level urban agriculture. Those type of things. Like, how do you create those kind of local economic generators around things like green infrastructure, around urban agriculture? Those are the type of things that, once we actually have developed the kind of tools and policies to make it happen, people will start to pay attention in a way that allows them to move in ways that are that give them the kind of dignity that they've just been looking for, and also the kind of relief that they need. Because ultimately, I do think so much of this is just about people being able to live a life of quality, and that has as much to do with being able to provide, to be able to make a decent living. Like, that really is, for the most part, that's what people need. I mean, I don't think most folks are just saying we have to be filthy rich. I mean, yeah, definitely some are, but for the most part, I think having enough is not something that many of us have. So if we can create opportunities so that we can have enough, and also meet a bunch of different needs at the same time, that's what we should try to do. Yeah.
And could I just ask a clarifying question in regards to mixed housing with lower income and higher income families all in the same area? And you said that, when it's not mixed, then there's this feeling of hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
But I could also imagine, growing up, in your small little apartment right next to some very large, wealthy family and feeling that sense of hopelessness as well. So I just didn't quite understand
But
that.
there's also a sense of aspiration, like, it's sort of like, wait, there's somebody in my community, who can actually do something. Right now, I have to tell you what troubles me more than anything, like, I'm known definitely in my neighborhood, not everybody, obviously, but there's an assumption, by some folks that have not ever seen me, and when they do, they just automatically assume that I do not live in the South Bronx. Why do you think that's the case? Because middle-class people don't live in the South Bronx. They move someplace else. Because why would you live here? I mean, only poor people that can't do anything else would live in a place like that. That really is the pathology that we are dealing with. And it's something that I think is really troubling, in our society. I'm like, I was born and raised here. It's like, no, I'm not going, this is my house. I just bought another one, actually, and right on the block that I've always wanted to live on in my neighborhood. And people are surprised. That's sort of painful. Yeah. Oh, microphone over there. Young lady right there. Thank you.